Hello, and welcome to the lecture on Chapter 12, the kidneys. This is part 1, and I believe it's going to be a 3-part lecture. So as always, we try to simplify as much as possible at the beginning of these lectures. So kidneys, super simplified, there are 3 main functions. There's regulation, that is helping the body maintain homeostasis. Waste removal, there's a way out of the body, taking things out of the blood. And finally, hormone production. So let's take a look at each of those things. With regulation, one of the most important things that's being regulated is the amount of water that's in the body. We always have to have some water go out with the waste that's being released. But in cases when the patient is a little dehydrated, the kidneys do as much as they can to hold on to that water, and vice versa. If there's excess water on board, the kidneys, they release the regular waste, but they also try to unload some of that extra water. The kidneys are also responsible for helping us manage our electrolytes. And what I mean by electrolytes are these ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, etc. And kidneys help us manage our blood pH. We mentioned when we were talking about the lungs and respiration, we mentioned how having an excess of carbon dioxide leads to an excess of hydrogen ions, having too much acid on board. Well, the kidneys can help with that. And so there can be some renal compensation for things going wrong in the respiratory system. And that mechanism is getting rid of the hydrogen ions. There are also bicarbonate ions, and depending on what the blood pH is, the kidneys will either get rid of extra hydrogen ions or get rid of extra bicarbonate. Okay, waste removal, the famous ones that we hear about the most, urea. This is going to, we'll go over a little bit where this came from. This is what gives urine its name, or this was named after urine. I actually don't know which way the naming went, but it's basically getting rid of some nitrogen that was part of protein that was ingested. Other forms of nitrogen that also get eliminated, ammonia and uric acid, but the most famous one is urea, and it's the one we have the most of. Another waste product that you've heard about before and we keep track of, not because it's so deadly, but just because it helps us calculate something, that's creatinine. And we're going to talk about where creatinine comes from. And drug metabolites. The kidneys are really good at getting rid of things, sometimes better than we would like them to be, because they get rid of medications too. But this is how many of our medications are processed and eliminated, is through the kidneys. And then finally, the hormone production part. There are 3 main hormones that are produced and released by the kidneys. One of them, renin, that's part of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And we'll talk some more about that. And this one actually has an impact on the kidney itself. The renin ultimately leads to the release of the aldosterone, and aldosterone has an impact on the kidneys. We'll get to that. These other 2 have impacts in other areas of the body. So erythropoietin is produced and released from the kidney. This is the signal to the bone marrow that we need more red blood cells. Erythropoietin is also known as EPO. Why it's made in the kidneys, nobody really understands, but it's made in the kidneys and it's released from the kidneys. But the target tissues are out in the bone marrow. And then activated vitamin D. Yeah, it's true that vitamin D can be made in the skin, but it gets activated in the kidneys. And this is important for calcium absorption from the digestive system. And this will come up again when we talk about things that go wrong. So when kidneys aren't functioning and erythropoietin isn't being made, there are some consequences. Or kidneys aren't functioning and the activated vitamin D isn't being made. There are consequences for that as well. Then the other way of simplifying things is there are 4 main processes that the kidney does through these structures called nephrons. Filtration. This is when a liquid and solutes leave the blood and go into some tubes in the kidney. Most of the stuff that we just filtered, most of that we're going to pull back. That's called reabsorption. Specific molecules are being pulled back from the filtrate. It's like 99% of what we just filtered gets pulled back. And that sounds super inefficient, but if you've ever tried to get sand out of a bag or out of your pockets or anything, yeah, you could try to pick the sand out, but it's just easier to pull your pocket inside out, dust it out, and then put your change and your keys and your other things back in. And that's kind of the relationship here is, yeah, get everything out and then we'll pull back what we need. Secretion, this is the act of anything that didn't get out in filtration, but we still want to get out of the blood, gets actively pumped over using secretion. And then finally, anything that's left out of the blood in this filtrate, that's eventually going to be excreted from the body, and that's going to be released as urine. We will see these 4 steps. I'm going to show them to you at least 3 more times today. All right, so the 4 kidney processes, as a way of understanding them, I know I just gave you a pocket analogy, but I actually wrote in a closet analogy here. So we're pretend we're cleaning out a closet, and the way that we typically clean out a closet is in 3 steps. We empty the closet. We take stuff out of the closet. Now with the blood, we can't empty the blood. We can't dump everything out of the blood, but we dump about 20% of the stuff out. It's about a fifth of the plasma, and the stuff that's in the plasma gets dumped out. Both good and bad things get dumped. That step is what we call filtration. Then once we have that stuff out of the closet and on the floor, we start picking some things through. That's reabsorption. We're going to pull back most of the stuff that we just took out of the closet. We're going to pull most of that back. That's reabsorption. And then we'll look in the closet again, and there may be some more stuff that we can pick out. That's the process of secretion, where we actively select things to pull out, not just dump, 20% of whatever's in the closet. And then finally, the stuff that's left out on the floor, we take that out to the trash. That's the process of excretion. That stuff that got left out of the closet is not going to find its way back in, and we just need to get rid of it, get it out of the house. And that's urination. Okay. A gross anatomy of the kidney, and by gross, I mean just big, not disgusting. The outer layer of the kidney is referred to as the cortex. Then there's an inner part, medulla. These are general terms, cortex meaning shell and medulla meaning middle. And then there's this inner funnel shaped thing. That's the renal pelvis. That's going to be collecting all the stuff that's going to become urine, and that funnels down into the ureter. And our textbook doesn't talk a lot more about other aspects of the urinary system. It really does stay very focused on the kidney. Kidneys contain nephrons. Yeah, I'm going to mention it. So there's these transitions, and I generally edit them out, but I didn't do that today, so please don't be annoyed with me. I'll get them on the next part. So kidneys contain these microscopic structures called nephrons. So here's the kidney on the left, and we're going to zoom in on one little section and blow it up. It has thousands and thousands of these structures called nephrons. On this diagram, this is not from our textbook, but on this diagram, I'm indicating some of the capillaries that are present. There are basically two capillary beds that the blood goes through. The first one is the glomerulus, which means ball of yarn in Latin, because it looks like a ball of yarn. And the peritubular capillaries that are surrounding this tubule, this renal tubule. Now we're going to super simplify that structure. Oops. And the glomerulus that I just showed as a ball of yarn, this is being super simplified into this big ball here, but you can picture a bunch of little capillaries. There's a blood supply that brings blood to the glomerulus. That's afferent arterial or afferent arterial. Afferent means on the way in, and efferent means on the way out. So they're both arterioles, which is a little counterintuitive. Usually we think about the next collection is going to be a vein, but because it's going to go through another capillary, another set of capillaries, it's referred to as another arterial. So there's the blood supply coming into the glomerulus, and then there's the blood supply after the glomerulus going to this other peritubular capillaries. So this part, the glomerulus, that's going to allow us to dump stuff out of the blood. And then remember, we said 99% of that stuff we're going to pull back in. Where we pull it in is back into the peritubular capillary. So that's why the two capillary beds. So let's take a look at those four processes again. Oh, sorry. Let's look at the structures first. There's this glomerular capsule. You'll sometimes hear it referred to by the name of the guy who's credited for describing it, Bowman's capsule. It means the same thing. It's just this kidney structure that surrounds the ball of capillaries and catches the stuff that we're filtering out. And that funnels the stuff down into the renal tubule. And the renal tubule, as we will see, is long and kind of convoluted. I'm just showing it as a straight line here, but this is made up of the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. Now let's take a look at those four processes. So filtration occurs from the glomerulus. We're diffusing the plasma, largely water, with stuff dissolved in it. About 20% of the plasma and its stuff is coming out. Small stuff, bigger stuff is not allowed out. Blood cells are not supposed to get out. Proteins, which are much larger than some of the smaller nutrients that we're going to talk about, proteins should not be getting out. All right, so that's filtration. Then reabsorption, we said we're going to pull back, like over 90% of what we just filtered out, we're going to pull that back in. And that's occurring from the tubule back into the bloodstream. And then remember, there was some more fine tuning going in the other direction. So if there's more stuff we want to get rid of, and there always is, we're going to actively pump that from the blood into into the renal tubules. That's called secretion. And then once we put all three of these, the end result of all three of these processes, we filtered out some stuff. We pulled back most of the stuff, but this was the only way we could get some of that trash out, was to just dump it all. And so we pull back the stuff we want. And then some stuff we do have the ability to secrete some more of that stuff. And then everything that's left here in the tubule at the end, that's what becomes urine. And we excrete that, we urinate that out. All right, this is a diagram from our textbook. I know it's kind of busy. this tries to break down the total body fluids. Turns out the vast majority of the fluid in our body is actually tied up inside the cells. So it's intracellular. That's represented down here. It's this big content. Then the rest of our blood, the extracellular blood, some of that it's just right outside the cells. We call that interstitial fluid. It's in the tissues, but it's not inside the cells. But it's kind of between the cells, but it's not in the bloodstream either. So interstitial fluid, and then the last category you would have to cross into the blood vessel to get to, and that's the plasma. The plasma is the only fluid that the kidneys have access to. And so, yeah, the kidneys work hard at regulating our fluids and our electrolytes, but the kidneys really only have access to the plasma. And we have to rely on, movement of the fluids from inside the cell to outside the cell and so on. But this is the part that the kidneys can really act on. Yeah. All right, so the nephrons, we're going to look at them. And the textbook diagrams were not great, and I just couldn't find a good diagram. There is, on our additional resources, there's a video from Crash Course. It's the first one. And so I took a bunch of screenshots. So they're not perfect. These little balls in the animation, they're just moving through. So I caught them. They don't actually mean anything. Where exactly the little balls are means nothing. Okay, what I want to show you is, this is the big layout of a nephron. Here's the ball of capillaries, the glomerulus. That's where filtration is happening. And Bowman's capsule is going to catch the stuff that's coming out of this capillary. And then it's going to flow down this whole long renal tubule. So filtration happens in this first part. Then we get to the proximal tubule. So proximal and distal refer to how far away from the glomerulus is it. And I do recognize that it looks like this part is closer to the glomerulus than, say, this part. But if you can, like, as the crow flies, like, it's a direct line here. But the fluid, think about the route you would have to take if you were part of this fluid. So that's what we mean by closer and further away. If you want to picture yourself like walking down this long hallway, and there's no shortcut from this part of the hallway to this part of the hallway, you just have to walk the whole hallway. All right, so this first part is called proximal, and then it's referred to as convoluted because it's really twisty. So sometimes you'll hear it called the proximal tubule or the proximal convoluted tubule. This is where we're going to pull back a huge amount of the water, the electrolytes, the nutrients, and we'll get into that in more detail later. I just want to show you that there's a lot of reabsorption happening here. There's a certain amount of secretion where we're pushing some things that are still in the bloodstream, pushing them into the tubule. Then we get to the loop of Henle. It's I don't know how to describe it other than it's a straight and then a hairpin, and then it comes, straight down, hairpin, and then it comes back up. And that is where we're going to reabsorb a lot of our water, and where we're going to reabsorb the sodium, potassium, and chloride. We'll talk more about this later. And then finally, we get back to this kind of circuitous route, and that's another convoluted tubule. But since we're further away from the glomerulus, it's called the distal convoluted tubule. And this is where we do more fine tuning of the electrolytes. How much sodium do we need? How much potassium do we need? And yeah, So we do some more fine tuning here. And then finally, the stuff that's kind of dumping out of this tubule is going into what's known as a collecting duct. And we're not quite done yet. We do some more fine tuning of sodium levels and water reabsorption here. And yeah, I know it's complicated. I tried to simplify it a little bit. We'll get to why the details matter a little bit in part 3 of the lecture. All right, this is a diagram from our textbook showing there's a couple of different kinds of nephrons. We're not going to get into that much detail, but it's all the same steps that I just talked about. So here's the glomerulus. Here's a proximal convoluted tubule, then the loop of Henle. And then we're back to a distal convoluted tubule. Same thing on this kind of nephron. There's the glomerulus, proximal, loop of Henle, distal, and then into the collecting duct. And the stuff that stays in here is the stuff that's destined to become urine. I alluded to this, but let's spell it out. This is a nephron blood supply. This diagram is from our textbook. Let's take a look at here. There's the glomerular capillaries. There's an afferent or afferent arteriole. It's actually pronounced afferent, but that sounds so much like efferent that I mispronounce it so you can hear the difference. Afferent coming in and efferent going out. So afferent, bringing the blood in, then we squeeze out a bunch of the plasma here in the capsule. And then efferent, the remaining blood, goes to this peritubular capillary, which wraps itself all around the proximal and distal convoluted tubules and the loop of Henle. And that's where that reabsorption and secretion, that fine-tuning stuff is happening. And then it gets recollected in a venule, and it goes out from there and heads back towards the heart. This is again a close-up of part of what we've been looking at. This diagram is from our textbook. This is taking a closer look at the glomerular capillaries. So we have afferent arteriole, and the fluid is getting filtered out. And so they're clearly the cells of the endothelium here of the capillary, but then there's also some glomerular cells, and stuff that's in the blood needs to pass through both. So there's a real fine mesh, if you will, that's not going to allow, should not, if it's working right, it's not going to allow any of the cells through. It's not even going to allow proteins through. And that's Bowman's capsule, or the glomerular capsule means the same thing. And so this is the stuff that's going to proceed down through the proximal tubule. This diagram is also from our book, and it's basically trying to walk you through the pressures and all the different parts. We're not going to go in so much detail, but I did like a couple of things about this diagram. One is here. The pressure in the glomerular capillaries is pretty high. And remember what we said about their hydrostatic pressures that are going to push out from the capillaries. That and the Bowman's capsule capillaries, they're super, super leaky. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out, about 20%, as I've said. That suddenly becomes filtrate. That's the term for it, the stuff that we took out. If you need that closet analogy, it's the stuff that we took out from the closet and just put on the floor temporarily. That's the filtrate. So the glomerular capillaries favor filtration, that is pushing things out. The peritubular capillaries, this is the part of the circulation that's now wrapping itself around the renal tubule. That favors pulling things back in, reabsorption. And so much of what got dumped on the on the floor is going to get pulled back in the peritubular capillaries. It's the stuff that stays out in the filtrate. That is the stuff that's destined to become urine. So what stays out becomes urine. And then this is the last diagram for this part of our lecture. The summary of the renal processing, it's those 4 steps again. This is our textbook's diagram of it. And it's kind of nice. It's not as simplified as the one I showed you before, but it's still kind of nice. So we get the blood supply in. There's the afferent arteriole. We get to Bowman's capsule. This is the glomerulus, this ball of capillaries. Remember, there's that high pressure for capillaries pushing out. So a lot of the content, 20% of the plasma, is going to come out in this first step. This is the filtering step. Then we have the efferent arteriole giving rise to a bunch of capillaries. Now here, I like that it shows it. They're buddies. They're wrapped right against it. The peritubular capillary is there to retrieve a bunch of stuff that was just dumped out earlier because it was the only way to get some of the other waste products out. But there's a bunch of stuff that's in this filtrate that we want back. And that's the process here of reabsorption. And then there are some waste products that we weren't able to get them all out here during the filtration step, or some of them we couldn't get out in the filtration step and we have to get them out in this other way. But this costs energy. You know, it's easier, less energy intensive to just dump it out than to have to, you know, have transport proteins and have to pay for every single thing that we're going to take out. So that's secreted. And then finally, the stuff that is not reabsorbed, that stays here in the filtrate, that's the stuff that gets excreted in the urine. Yay. So that's a wrap up of part 1.